guess we should label that jack then. Oh, okay. Okay, good. That's good, okay. Bye.
Because eventually it's going to wire it to the table. The table goes with this. Box strapped under it.
Yes.
So that's the right jack. So
Yeah, okay.
we'll have to label it or something. But Eddie said in the future it's going to be permanent, but
Yeah.
it's not yet.
Okay.
Yeah, everything these days gets the power through the
Ethernet.
Yeah, almost everything.
I was surprised. Look at it. It's a box. It's a big box, you know.
Well, usually the DM stuff, it's got the jack is metal.
Yeah.
And so is the cable. It's got a
Right.
it's got a metal shield in it, and
Sure.
that's not. No. A little misleading.
Oh, well. It's good you're here.
I brought a card in for Kevin Kwan. His dad died.
Oh, I
It's
see.
it's up out Cheryl's
Cheryl's
in the
desk.
5th. Yeah.
Yes, I heard about it.
Okay.
So you gotta have a couple hours to choose one.
Yeah. Yeah. He's coming back Monday, right? So. I didn't get everybody done at Telecom today, so I'll finish them up tomorrow. That's it.
Yeah.
When's it starting? At 1:30 or 1?
One. Supposed to.
So I didn't realize that, but yeah, took that long to get here anyway. Luckily, I was on the way down.
Yeah. I was thinking 8. 1 o'clock. It's not a big deal. I'm not doing a presentation. Maybe this one.
No. Were you here when some guy was down in the lobby complaining he didn't want to be searched?
No, I didn't. Walk around like,
Hang out till
yeah.
till it gets started. So, and then I had work to do up on 11. And then lunch. And then go back.
You're quite busy. You guys are short handed or?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
We have 4 kids. Kevin Kwan, me, and Kevin Lewis came in, and Conrad came in.
Oh yeah, Conrad.
So we got the 4. It's a good group. Eddie's the boss. So,
Actually, our group is like we short 2 people.
yeah.
We used to have like Ron Bennett, he retired.
Oh yeah.
The other one is Dave Dearden. He left.
Oh yeah.
He went to Ottawa.
Oh, I think they're
University.
Oh yeah. So you're short. When are you gonna retire?
I can retire in 1 year.
Yeah. Oh. Oh.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Marty.
I was threatened not to come to the meeting. Can you believe that? I was threatened by staff downstairs. What the hell is this meeting about? So you can threaten me? I can be threatened?
Can I do what?
Ridiculous, you people.
Oh yeah, you just arrived.
You afraid of me?
Oh.
What a fucking joke.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Good. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah. There's no switch on this mic. Okay. Bye. Yeah. This mic is live. And we're talking. working and it's on the internet live.
Cut it off. Actually, they don't need it.
We'll leave it there in case they do. The system is supposed to look after. They can hear us. We're going over the internet. Good thing we didn't see that.
We didn't, Jamie. We didn't swear.
Did you guys screen? Search?
I went through the same process.
Yeah, did you like it? What about you, Bingo? Did they search you? What they need is a big lawsuit. All the fucking $9 billion. Who's the president? El Sorcillo is alive. He has a gun.
Yeah, well, you have to come back. How did you do?
Okay, members, I think I'm going to call the meeting to order. I thank people for their indulgence. We're just waiting to make sure that anybody who was coming would have the most time possible to get here. But I don't want to keep those who have arrived waiting. So I'll call the meeting to order and start first by before I ask for declarations, we have our newest member starting to learn about the budget in advance of her first full board meeting. And Chair Pringle, Chair of the Police Services Board, is here briefly to introduce our newest member of the Police Board, Mr. Pringle.
Thanks, Shelley. Yes, we're delighted, as everybody knows, Dr. Nuria stepped down at the end of the last meeting, and so we're delighted that Upla Chandrasekhara, who is the Director of Public Policy for CMHA Ontario, is our newest board member. And I've had the opportunity to meet with her on a number of occasions over the last week or so. And she's just going to be a great board member for us, and she's going to drive the mental health file, which is so important to this organization, forward, as well as be an active participant. So, first of all, Upla, thank you for putting your name forward. Welcome. Interesting to start at the budget, but why not? But enjoy the process, and thank you.
Welcome to the board.
Yes.
Welcome to the first Police Services Board. We have a rule here. No question is a question not worth asking, so feel free. Before we start, I'm going to ask, since we have the entire budget, capital and operating being presented to us today, while it isn't a decision-making committee, we still ask if there are any declarations of interest under the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Seeing none. We have some written submissions and we have some oral deputations, but I canvass the audience. They all the deputants want to hear the presentation first and then do their speaking, so that they may have notes they want to add. So I'm going to turn it right over to our CAO, Mr. Venetiano.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and welcome, Ms. Chandrasekhara. So what we're going to cover today is the operating budget request for the service, along with our capital request and our parking enforcement request, and then Joanne Campbell will cover the board part of the budget. So we'll start with the operating, and so just to give you the bottom lines right away, we've achieved a 0% increase over 2017 in 18. And that marks the second year in a row that we've actually achieved a 0% increase. So when we prepare a budget, we really are trying to balance the need to provide public safety services in an adequate and effective way with the need to be both affordable and sustainable in the longer term, particularly given the challenges that the city is currently facing. So we want to be a part of that solution in terms of their physical challenges. Part of the challenges then that brings is that, of course, we're in a year of transition, so I would call this a transitional budget. We're trying to right-size the service, change the way we do business, and at the same time, continue to provide day-to-day services. And so you can appreciate that some people then have to do things that support the initiatives as well as their day-to-day work. So that's certainly a challenge that we are currently dealing with and addressing. In the longer term, there needs to be some discussions and some investments that will have to be made to actually assist us in meeting some of those challenges. So when you look at, and what drives this, so basically our strategic plan for the next 3 years is basically the way forward. The Transformational Task Force final report is basically driving us and guiding us in terms of where we want to go as an organization and what we want to achieve. So when we look at some of the key accomplishments, we've continued our moratorium on hiring and promotions, like I said, to allow us to right-size and deliver services in a more effective way. We've actually returned 2 facilities early in the year to the city. Those facilities are worth about $4.5 million. And basically that allows the city to develop those facilities or sell those facilities, whatever they decide to do. But we've also saved about $250,000 on the operating costs associated with those things. We've disbanded TABIS and deployed those members to other priorities. We've worked, human resources is a big chunk, and you're going to see a presentation at the October 26th meeting from Deputy McLean. But we are trying to actually develop competencies that both our civilian and uniform members need to aspire towards, and what we are looking for in terms of the people that we need to actually transform and deliver excellent services. And a lot of the work, because these are huge and complex initiatives, a lot of the accomplishments, if I can call it that, in 2017 has actually been the planning that's gone into identifying some of these initiatives, some of the roadblocks that we have to face, and then the roadmap in terms of how we actually achieve it. And some of those are the connected officer, which gives us mobility right across the city, the district model, the centralization of the Crime Information Bureau, and CISU. Next year, what we're looking at is getting out of the school crossing guard and lifeguard program and allowing us to focus on core public safety services. We're looking at the feasibility of alternative service delivery for parking enforcement in courts, the transformation of our human resource function, like I said, development of a district model as part of our territorial optimization, and then also the proof of concept for the connected officer, which is already well underway. So last year when we did a budget, we heard from the board and we heard from the public. And what the public said was, we'd like information a little sooner in a better and more user-friendly format. We did provide information in the past, but I think what we're trying to do this year is actually advance some of that information and allow the public to have earlier access to and input to the actual budget request. So basically on September 12th, we posted a bunch of information on our website. It's on the board's website as well. That basically gives the public information on our budget, how we're structured, and also provided almost line by line, or not almost, line by line accounts of what makes up our $1 billion budget. They also said that they want more access. And so what we used to do in private before and with the board budget subcommittee, we are now doing in public. And this meeting and the information session on September 19th is an illustration of what we're trying to do. So we had the information session on September 19th. It was the first time that we've done that, and certainly that will evolve over time. We're doing the presentation today that will allow the board budget committee to ask questions, but also get input and questions from the public. And then we'll present a board budget committee recommended budget to the board on October 26th, where again the public will have the ability to provide input. This chart basically shows you where we started and where we've ended up. So our 2017 budget was $1005.3 million, or just over $1 billion. When we started, and this would assume that we staffed at the same level, it included inflationary increases as well as the collective agreement. That created a pressure of close to $38 million. We reduced that pressure through our review process, through the moratorium and other management actions that were taken to about $15 million. And we're here today to recommend a budget to the board budget committee that's flat line and basically is at the same level as it was in 2017. Some of the summary of changes, and I'll just focus on the big ones. Our collective agreement impact is $18 million in 2018. This is the last year of a 4-year agreement. And so certainly from an outlook perspective, we're going to have to make assumptions moving forward. But you can see the biggest chunk of reductions was really in the moratorium. And basically putting a hold on civilian and uniform hiring until we could figure out, and until we figure out how the organization should look, how it should be structured, and what levels of service we should be providing. There are some increases that were absorbed by those decreases in terms of reserve contribution, and I've talked about this before. We have deferred those because of the need to meet budget targets for the last 10 years. We have to, if we're going to be sustainable and prudent and fiscally prudent, we have to start making those investments. Those are in our budget base, and that's a good thing. When you look at the budget, we get money from the province, we get money from user fees, we get money from our reserves, but the bulk of the money comes from the taxpayer, about $1 billion. So certainly we have a responsibility to ensure that those monies are spent wisely and that we get the greatest value from their investment in public safety. When you look at where the budget goes, I think everybody knows that a good chunk, almost 90%, goes to pay the very people that provide services, and that includes salaries, the benefits that have been bargained, statutory deductions, as well as premium pay. And then the balance is basically non-salary expenses like equipment and supplies, as well as our reserve contributions. Our people are our greatest assets. And this is right from the TTF report, being where the public needs us the most, enhancing partnerships to create safe communities, and focusing on what are and will become even more complex needs of a large city. And we're committed to achieving that and making Toronto the safest and best city in the world. As I indicated, people are the biggest part of our budget, so when we look at that, this chart basically indicates where we're at with our uniform staffing. So the dark line on the top, that's basically what the number of positions, uniform positions, not bodies, that we have approved, and you'll see that that went from 5,600 to just over 5,400. The decrease from 5,600 to 5,400 was civilianization, so we saw a bump up on the civilian side. But you can see that by the end of 2020, we'll be about 578 officers below our strength. So then we develop a strategy, and the strategy really takes into account how many people are going to exit the service in a given year, and usually we lose about 150 to 160. This year, we're already at 210, which is an anomaly. So then we lose it, and because we lost more people than what we budgeted for in 2017, in order to keep services at an adequate level, the board, the chief, and the TPA agreed to have a class of 80. And that class will start in December, 20 in December of this year, and then 30 in April and August of next year. And that certainly will help us as we transition. Actually, the average deployed strength then, as a result of that strategy, will be about 4,870 actual boots on the street in 2018, and you'll see at the end of 18, it's really small, we're at about 4,800. We're looking, again, like I said, a new sustainable model for service delivery. We're basically anticipating a reduction to 4,750 officers, really by late 18, early 20. And that will take into account the demand for policing services. Like I said, Toronto is becoming a destination for a number of events, and so that in itself brings challenges in terms of the protection of people that come to those events, VIP and others. The type of crime is changing. We're now dealing with national security issues. We're dealing with cybercrime. Crime trends, as much as they went down by about 24% between 2006 to 2015 or 14, the last 2 years, 16 and 17, we've seen a slight increase in crime that I'll talk about later. But we are meeting the challenge by focusing on core services, changing the way we do business, evolving and delivering services with few members, which then requires that we do things better and differently and in a more affordable way. Civilians, our count of civilian now, actual people in seats is about 1,900. Civilians in our organization are different in the sense that they are not just administrative people. And you can see that 42% of our civilians are actually direct support people in the courts, the bookers in our division, station duty operators, and the 911 communication operators that play such a vital role in ensuring that we get to the calls for service that we need to get to. The next part is more indirect support around divisions and investigative units, fleet, our cars, our information technology. So this is the technical hard services, if I can call it that. And then the actual administrative services represent about 10% of our actually complement. So if when you look at the civilian staffing history, again, you'll see that we gap to about 4 or 5% in the early years. And in the last year or so, our gapping, when you look at 2017, we have a shortfall of about 348 positions, which is a 16% vacancy rate on the civilian side, and that's something that we need to address. When you look at the gross operating budget, like I indicated before, the bulk of it is salaries and benefits. Reserves represent about 47%. So reserves are really, these reserves are really contributions from our checking account to the reserves, which are savings accounts that are required to meet certain obligations and legal requirements, as well as collective agreement requirements. So our operating expenses overall are about 8% of our overall budget. And they would include facility maintenance, the cleaning of our facilities by the city, utility costs, the maintenance of our computer system, which as we increase in technology, those expenses will have to be contained because they will increase. Gas for our cars, clothing, training, and miscellaneous equipment. I talked about a reserve contribution. That's a bill of about $47 million a year. And basically, you can see that the bulk of it is for insurance, central sick bank. Some of these are vehicle and equipment, being a good chunk of it, but some of these are also collective agreement bargained requirements that we now have to fund, and we've chosen to fund them in a more sustainable way by contributions to the reserves. One of the biggest opportunities, and certainly you're going to be getting a report, like I said before, from Deputy Chief McLean and Director May at the October meeting, is transforming our HR function, professionalizing that function, and making sure that that function can support the important initiatives that we are going to move into as we transform as an organization on the operational side. And so that is an investment that's going to be required of $2.8 million, but we've been able to absorb that investment by other areas, by making reductions to other areas of the service. So that still allows us to get to zero. I mentioned before the focus on core services, and so one of the things that we want to do is basically transfer lifeguard program and school crossing guard programs to the city. They're $1.5 and $7.6 million programs respectively. The lifeguards, I'm pleased to report, has happened, and so the city will be taking this over as part of their Parks and Rec. We are having continuing discussions with the city manager and the city with respect to the school crossing guards, and we'll certainly update the board on those discussions as more clarity comes to that one program. When you look at historical budget increases, this basically tells you that if we didn't have collective agreement increases, which is not realistic, basically we would be below our budget in terms of overall budget from 2006 to 2018. The services operating budget has increased by $52 million since that time, and $18.7 million on the reduction. So in other words, we've actually absorbed a lot of the increase from the collective agreement. And I think this next chart will show you what happened in the last, let's say, 5 years, where the purple numbers are collective agreement impact, the blue are the other impact, and you can see we went below zero in a number of years, or very close to zero in other years, in order to mitigate the increase in overall budget that the city would have to pay for. Our outlooks, so we do try to look, and the city is going to be enhancing this whole requirement, but certainly we like to look beyond just next year. And so right now, all things being equal, if we staff the way we're supposed to staff, making some assumptions around the collective agreement increases, we're looking at increases of 3.2% and 2.5% in 19 and 20 respectively. Those are preliminary numbers. Those do not reflect any review. Those do not reflect any discussions with key stakeholders. But it's going to be pretty tough, and I guess this is my message, it's going to be pretty tough to come in at a flatline budget, again, based on all the decreases that we've achieved over the years, as well as the requirement that's going to have to be made to invest in transitional initiatives. Service demands, call for services, as you can see, are relatively flat. The hours spent on calls for services are also flat. I talked about major crime indicators, and these are a barometer of how safe a city is. They're just 7 indicators that are used right across at least North America. And overall crime has actually increased compared to last year. It had decreased for a number of years. The only one that's actually gone down this year is homicides. We were at 35 on August 31st. We've gone up 10, 9 or 10 since that time, so that's edging up. But you can see that there does appear to be an increase in terms of levels of crime, which affect quality of life. And again, we want a safe city, so people come here to invest, they want to live here, and they want to do business here. So that's the operating budget. On the capital side, so the capital is stuff that we borrow or use reserves to fund. And our overall gross budget is about $520 million. And basically, you can see the city gives us targets that we have to meet in terms of debt financing. We've met those targets on average over the 10-year period, and in fact, year to year in the first 5 years of the program. Capital is basically, like I said, funded from the issuance of debt by the city, development charges, which are charges that enhance the infrastructure in the city, as well as reserve contributions. Our 18 capital request is 22.7 million, and you can, or actually 44.1 million when you consider both ongoing and new projects. And you can see that the net capital budget that needs to be funded, this is debt that the city has to issue on our behalf, is $20.9 million. A lot of the projects in our capital program, and again, our capital program is a transitional program, particularly as it relates to bricks and mortar as well as technology. But we do have a state of good repair. This is an ongoing cost or capital item to keep our facilities in a reasonable state of good repair. Transforming corporate support is an important project where we're actually increasing the functionality of our HR systems and consolidating 2 systems into one, which will create cost and other efficiencies. Our peer-to-peer site, that's a risk management site, and when you look at what we're going through as a city and in the world, having this risk management mitigation strategy where we have a peer-to-peer site that's off our grid, 40 kilometers away from our current main site, is just good risk management business. We are looking at the amalgamation of 54 and 55 division. We're down to 3 sites. There are community meetings that will occur for public consultation on October 10th and October 17th. And so that is a project that we are very, very excited about and want to move forward quickly on. And so certainly we are pushing the city very hard in terms of selecting a site. Enterprise business intelligence, that's again our commitment to information that was part of the TTF report, our investment in technology, and this allows us to put information in a reliable, consistent form in one system so that people don't have to go to multiple systems to get information. And then the other two are the TPS archiving is a small project. The other big one, and the board's going to be seeing a report in the October meeting in terms of a vendor, is our radio replacement. These are the radios that our members communicate. They're mission critical in terms of public and officer safety, and it's going to require an investment over 10 years of about $39 million. This is the vehicle and equipment reserve, and basically just tells you where the money is going, so you can see vehicles are a good chunk of it, and this again is over a 10-year period. And you can see it gives information on the reserve and how the reserve funds those projects, which takes pressure off the need for the city to borrow for those requirements. And this just basically shows you where we spend, and you can see that 3/4 of our spending on capital is on land, bricks and mortar, and information technology. And I can tell you that as we move forward, I think we're going to see a shift. We're going to see less money being spent on buildings and more money being spent on technology. Parking enforcement also came in at a 0% increase, and so it met the city's budget target. Basically, parking enforcement is not part of our budget. It's part of the parking tag operations budget at the city, which is comprised of revenue processing, court services, and legal services. Our task is to keep traffic moving through the enforcement of bylaws and through education. We don't get any of the money from those enforcement activities. That goes directly to the city. And so really what we're working very closely now with the mayor's office on a number of rush hour routes, and is to really try to keep traffic moving as best we can and enforce those bylaws by doing it. So like I said, the city receives revenue from parking tags. We don't get any of it. But I can tell you the revenues as well as our operations are impacted by some of the decisions that City Council makes. So as an example, the 10-minute grace period is great because it shows some goodwill to those that are a little late coming back to their car. But it certainly does create some operational inefficiencies for us because our officer now has to chalk, go do the rest, come back, chalk again, and issue a ticket. There's increased fine initiatives, and we are moving. The city approved the alternate parking APS, administrative parking system, which just takes the adjudication of tickets from the courts into a less legal system. And you can see there's the parking enforcement budget details broken down by salaries, benefits, and reserves. And that's it for me, and I went as fast as I could, Andy. And now I'll turn it over to Joanne.
Thank you. So the Police Services Board presents a separate budget for its own expenses. And again, we have come in at a 0% increase. So the budget includes salary for the board staff members, and it includes the City Council approved amounts for remuneration of the appointees to the board. It also includes funds for the day-to-day operation of the board's office, the expenses related to meetings of the board, its committees, its advisory bodies. And the budget includes a fairly significant amount of funds for labor relations legal costs, as well as a fairly significant amount for the chargeback for the services which are provided to the board and to the police services by the City of Toronto's legal division. So again, you see the breakdown of salaries and other expenses, a 0% increase, total budget of approximately $2.3 million, achieving the city's target. In terms of future outlook, the report before you on the agenda from the chair does indicate that for 2019, should amendments be proposed to the Police Services Act, the board would need to assess at that time what impact any such changes might have on resourcing. We're not building because it's a complete unknown at this point. Yeah. Thank you.
And that's it. There's no capital requests. No tech, really? No new tech for you? Tony needs 170 million. Okay, thank you, presenters. We have a few deputations. So I think we should go to those right off the bat. Is Miguel back? Miguel Avila, you are first. You're listed under operating budget, but if you veer into capital, we won't hold it against you.
I'm going to start by saying that I just want to say I want to send my best regards to the family of Mark Saunders and Chief Saunders. I know I fired him last time, but as a human person, as a human being, I think we can get sympathetic with what is happening to him, and I send him my best wishes. I have no comments regarding the parking because my good friend will come here and talk about parking. Unfortunately, Chris is not here. He's not willing to accept the new conditions of the screening and search at the lobby. We missed some important input from Chris. As you're aware, he's an accountant. I am an accountant. I'm an activist, so I'm going to speak as an activist. I don't see anywhere in these documents if we're doing away with the vacation time when an officer is disciplined for X, Y, and Z reasons, that officer has to be waiting for without not on duty but staying at home or doing whatever. Is not reflected on this budget. So if we want to have a transformation task force that really is going to do an impact in the taxpayers' ear, we had to do some changes to the collective agreement that is coming up in 2018. I noticed that you are calculating about $17 million. No, sorry, 1.773% increase, which translates in $17.4 million for 2018. I want to remind you that if the OPP, the Ontario Provincial Police, gets a higher increase on their collective agreement with the province, that sets the tone for the next round of negotiations for the municipal levels. I say this because I remember clearly when Dalton McQuinty, before he left politics, he blessed the Ontario Police with a big chunk of money increase. Now, that argument was the whole purpose of increasing the salaries at a level that we never seen it before. And this has put a lot of pressure on other services at the City of Toronto. So I think this number is not accurate. We can assume that it's going to be 1.73% increase in the next negotiations. And our accountant says it will be irresponsible if the union comes and says, hey, we want more money for our members in the next 4 years. I think it's wrong to assume that that is the number. I'm not speaking as an accountant, but I'm speaking as an activist. That number, it could be 3%. And then what happened then? Or you're not going to meet the demands of the city, which is 0%. Which is always the wish of City Council at budget time. But we know that there have been some delays, some resistance from the union to say we have always been blessed by City Council. Any demands that we request and put forward, we are being granted. So that's all. I want to say regarding the budget. In relation to the current idea of moving the board across the city is very positive. Perhaps this will alleviate some of the pressure that we had in the lobby. So I'm sorry, this is not part of the budget conversation, but
I'll need you to wrap up, though. I'm giving you a lot of leeway.
I'm going to wrap it up.
You got about 30 more seconds.
In a good note,
thank you.
Let's have a conversation. Let's have a dialogue, public input before we set rules. Thank you so much, and I
I just want to say that I was a bit offended when I came into the building. So, but now I'm calm. I took yoga classes yesterday, so I'm feeling better.
Thank you. Hang on, are there any questions? Are there any questions? I just want to ask a question, Miguel, because you do talk to a lot of our regular followers of the board. Did we not do a good job of communicating last time that in terms of a number of the issues that you raised are to do with collective bargaining, and that is the biggest piece. But I'm wondering from listening to your deputation if we didn't do a good job of communicating last time that under coordinated bargaining, which is going to be the province's direction again, that effect of whatever they got, we must get higher, is somewhat mitigated. So we can't actually anymore predict that whatever OPP gets is what we'll get. In fact, the opposite happened last time. Our lower contract caused all the other contracts to reduce.
Well,
We're being called a landmark contract. We just don't get credit for it. But did we not communicate about coordinated bargaining? You're not familiar with that process?
No, unfortunately, I wasn't aware of that process. But again, this
So we need to
this
do
is
better.
the information I received from other Ps, that
Yeah.
the 8.8% that the OPP received was a stepping stone for the other unions to demand from their boards.
In the past,
In
right.
the past, yes. So hopefully, if they're trying to minimize it
Yeah.
and to be a real demand, I support those increases. Like, the Toronto Zoo employees, they were asking for 3%. They have settled for 1.25%, which is
Right.
good.
Right.
Why not this board can ask the police union, hey, why don't we settle a 1.25% increase? Which is realistic. I received a 2% increase in my ODSP. 2%.
Right.
But so the level of is here, ODSP is here, salaries are here. So in order for us to become at par with the other people, we have to have our rates increased. But that's all the other topic of discussion at City Council, at the province. But, you have to be realistic, demand how the poor people live. Because we're talking about middle-class people, right, who demand more and more and more. Mm-hmm. They have to realize there always are poor people coming in loads, in immigrants who have to live in 3-4 persons in one unit, in one bedroom unit. Come on.
Absolutely.
Open up your eyes and realize that not everybody has this privilege of having middle-class salaries here.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. I'll be asking some follow-up questions later about your deputation. Unfortunately, Mr. Langenfeld has not come upstairs. Since we had the presentations all together, then Mr. Moran, you have a deputation on the parking enforcement unit, which we've already had a presentation on.
Take notice that the Crown is the surety for Mr. Derek Moran, the person I have. I just want to say, by me speaking at this meeting, I don't think this is working.
Yep, you're on.
At this meeting, this shall not be deemed to be in any way my consent, expressed or implied, and doing so is fraud. God bless Her Majesty the Queen, and long live Her Majesty the Queen. And I didn't catch her name, but the new board member here, I just want to acknowledge and accept the oath that she took to uphold the Constitution, because she's going to find out I take that really seriously. So in this item, I don't know if you're aware about this, Councillor Carroll, but I have a big problem with the administrative penalty system.
Really?
Yes, I do. In this item, it mentions at its July 12, 2016 meeting, Council adopted the report on the administrative penalty system for parking violations. So I'm just going to first go ahead and correct that. That should say, at its July 12, 2016 meeting, Toronto City Council voted to effectively violate Section 11D of the Constitution with the administrative penalty system. I just wanted to know if anyone had a chance to actually read this new amended section of the City of Toronto Act. It reads, administrative penalties, Section 374.1, subsection 1, without limiting Section 7 and 8, the city may require a person subject to such conditions as the city considers appropriate to pay an administrative penalty if the city is satisfied that the person has failed to comply with a bylaw of the city passed under this act. Oh, okay, so an administrative penalty applies to a person, does it? I don't know, everyone's seen the movie Skyfall. There's this great little scene where Q here is admiring the code that's being constructed by the bad guy in it. And he simply says, admiringly, the use of obfuscating code meant to conceal its true purpose. So this is from the Integrity Commissioner of the City of Toronto's Code of Conduct. Members of adjudicative boards shall seek to serve the city's and the public's interest by upholding both the letter and the spirit of applicable laws of the federal parliament and Ontario legislature. This is from Black's Law Dictionary, 9th edition. Letter of the law is defined as the strictly literal meaning of the law, rather than the intention or policy behind it. So again, there's those maxims of law that I keep on saying when I come here about in law, all definitions are dangerous, and especially in civil law, all definitions are dangerous. Anyone know what the definition of person is in the beginning of the City of Toronto Act? Person includes a municipality, unless the context otherwise requires. Now, of course, Derek, don't forget, you keep on telling us Cochrane versus the Ontario Attorney General Superior Court says that the easier way to read that is to replace the word includes with the word means, and the Attorney General's office is absolutely right. So that should read, person means a municipality unless the context otherwise requires. So there's another maxim of law that says, applicatio est vita reguli, the application is the life of a rule, because as that 53 division officer agreed with me when I spoke to him that time, that it would be fraud to go around charging people with laws that didn't actually apply to them, right? So all people have to worry about when they go to these unconstitutional tribunals is to get these fake judges to take judicial notice of the fact that they aren't a municipality and these tickets will be withdrawn. Because I just want to, oh, it's too bad.
Okay, so, but I ask you to remember, Derek, because I think you know this, when it gets to the actual penalty part and the actual consequences at the end of the line, that isn't actually part of the parking enforcement unit budget. So the budget for the officers doing the enforcing is what we're focused on today.
Okay, I'm speaking on something that's in the agenda.
Well, we're dealing with the enforcement end. You're actually dealing with the administration of the APS at the other end of the line and the revenues collected and whether they should be, which is really something I look forward to hearing from you on in the city budget.
I invoke Section 2B of the Constitution, which guarantees my freedom of expression, barring any objections, of course.
Well, we do have a set of rules and procedures here also that says if you register to speak to an item on the agenda, you're speaking to the item on the agenda.
And the Constitution supersedes those bylaws because those bylaws apply to a person actually, and there's no definition for what a person is in the new board's expanded definition section that you guys mentioned several months ago. So if I've ever given the Toronto Police Services Board any reason to believe that I'm a person, then that would be a mistake, and to please forgive me.
Well, I'm letting you run out the clock anyway, but if you have points to make about the actual enforcement, you're going to use up your time.
Okay, well,
so make sure you get to that part
How about this then? The gist is the budget, the money that's raised that goes towards the budget, and no, it goes to the City of Toronto, but that circulates back around to pay these parking enforcement officers. But if these parking enforcement officers are going around and charging people with laws that don't actually apply to them, then that money being generated is a result of fraud. Like, does anybody have a problem with that? I do. Like I come here and I speak on this subject over and over and over. Nobody ever asks me questions. Nobody ever challenges me. I mean, Mayor Tory's always sitting there. He never even, rebuts anything I have to say. Like, does anybody in this room actually know what the definition of a City of Toronto bylaw is? Probably not. I've mentioned it before. Nobody's remembered. How much time do I have left, Councillor Carroll?
1 minute.
Okay, because I just want to remind everyone that when he ran for mayor, that Mayor Tory, had a podium here, respect the law. And he had another one here, respect the law. Well, I just want to know that in the future, because it's kind of a conflict of interest. I love you all platonically, Councillor Carroll, but it's a bit of a conflict of interest for you to be, doing this right now because it's a matter that generates revenue for the City of Toronto. And City of Toronto bylaws only apply to City of Toronto employees. Like, that's just the way it is. That's why we have a constitution. Section 32.1 of the Constitution. I had the conversation with Marco Mendicino. He's just the parliamentary assistant to the Attorney General of Ontario. That, yeah, he knows what I'm talking about when I brought up Peter Hogg's clarification of Section 32.1. Except we're dealing with the City of Toronto, you know what I mean? Everyone just thinks that, oh, we're going to pass a bylaw, and if bylaws automatically apply to everyone, that's just the way it is. But it's not the way it is. So, how much time do I left?
You're out of time. I'm indulging at this point. So if you could wrap it up.
One last line. So if we go into these unconstitutional tribunals and say to the fake judges, what evidence has this unconstitutional tribunal been given that I have any surety in this matter? I'd like to think that Mayor Tory, since he campaigned on respect the law, will tell those fake judges to say, hey, just withdraw those tickets, because that guy knows what he's talking about.
Thank you. Any questions of the deputy?
Any questions? No questions for me?
No questions.
No questions? Okay.
Those are the deputies who are with us. So we're going to take it into committee, and we can ask member questions now. Mr. Leeds, I have a few myself. Members, any questions? Bruce?
I know that we were hoping that Mr. Sewell would be able to present deputation. He's not here today.
Mm-hmm.
That's some questions that I would like
Yeah.
to use as part of my line of questions to the service going forward. So members have in front of them Mr. Sewell's application. And I'm not sure if one of the room does. I'm going to go through what I've just counted as 6 or 7 questions that he's asked. The purpose of me listing them is that I think
your microphone's not on.
Thank you. The purpose of me listing the questions of the deputy, Mr. Sewell, is to provide a broad range of information to people who may not have heard these questions because he's not here, but also what you have presented today and what I've said before is perhaps the most succinct and transparent budget we have, in my experience, presented to the world. So for our newest member, Ms. Chandrasekhara, this is probably the best way for you to actually start on in this role, because you are going to be able to see how everything connects. And so when I go through Mr. Sewell's questions, my dream would be, and I've mentioned this in passing, to have these questions as part of a frequently asked questions page, whether it's these ones or variations of them, so that we can show to those who may not be able to attend here, but who are interested in the police budget, the largest budget in the city's budget, what the connections are between the questions the community is asked and the budget, because it's not obvious to anyone who is starting out. So I'm just going to review some of those questions exactly as they are written in this deputation. You don't have it in front of you, do you? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So this is a deputation from Mr. John Sewell from the Toronto Police Accountability Coalition, dated October 4th. He says it's for presentation as is usual practice to this budget meeting, October 5th. He observes that the operating budget is not larger than the 2016 budget, but comments that that is a small gain. And then he essentially asks, what is it that the Toronto Police Service has been doing in 2017 and will do differently in 2018? And his comment is that the budget is almost entirely silent. I think what you walked us through provides answers to some of the following specific questions, and that's where I think there could be an intersection between these types of questions, perhaps other questions that the public asks, and the work that your team has put together here, using the budget as the platform to answer questions that others might see as unrelated to the budget, but which we all know are related to the budget. So the first question is about body-worn cameras. Will the experiment with body-worn cameras proceed, and how much money has been allocated for this? So I'm not asking you to answer them necessarily, because you may not be able to, and if there are some that you feel merit an answer in this setting, or that other members here would like to hear the answer, by all means. So that's one question he asks. He notes that in reference to body-worn cameras, that the reference is made in the capital budget submission, but it's unclear whether the item will proceed in I think he means 2018. Second question is, what monies are set aside to reduce racism in police activities? I know you referenced in your budget presentation some of the work on competencies that will be coming forward in the October meeting, so I think that's part of the answer, so another way to connect the dots. He asks in that the next same paragraph, what programs are being established to end this, which is the discrimination that he notes in the preceding sentence around higher arrest rates, denial of bail, and so forth. So what programs are being established to end this, and what funds have been allocated for this purpose? And I know that the Transformational Task Force has some of those answers, so again, a way to connect those two pieces of work. Fourth question, what experiments will be tried in 2018 to make a more efficient police force? Again, I think some of the answers are forthcoming both in the competencies and the Transformational Task Force, but it would be good to spell it out. He specifically asked, will directives go out to reduce the number of officers attending each traffic accident as recommended by staff several years ago? That's the fifth question. Sixth question, will the amount of random patrol work shown in many studies to be a waste of human and petrol energy be reduced? Seventh question, will police attendance at courts be curtailed in situations where they are not needed and the 4 hours of time need not be paid? And the last question is, what new civilianization will take place to improve service and save money? So all very fair questions that we have as a board and as a service turned our mind to, and I think it's an opportunity for us to provide answers, perhaps starting now, but certainly going forward. Thank you.
Did you want to field some of those right now?
Up to just a few minutes here. We can certainly, as Ms. Mullen went through the questions, there's some that I think we can handle and answer today. There's some that we may have to go back and because we want to make sure that we do provide a sort of comprehensive answer. I do want to say, that there was questions that were asked.
There were questions asked at the September 19th session, and those have already been posted on our website, the questions and the answers, so certainly people that are interested can look at that.
On the service website?
On the service website, and there's a link on the board's website as well. So certainly we can start with some of these questions, but it's at your call.
But I don't want to lose this thought. Where would I find them on the board's website? Because I didn't see them. Like, where would I find the link?
You have a link to our website, and it's on our website. It's posted today, but the link that was provided at the community information session goes to that website.
Okay, I'm a good test because I surf the web like a real person, and I don't know where to go. So I'm a good test that we haven't made it easy enough. Where am I going? Okay, which brings me to my first question. Why don't we have a budget page? Never mind. Okay, meeting, so I have to go into an agenda. So I have to know when we talked about it to find it. Yeah. Not my favorite thing. Anyway, so if I go to 19, because the question was asked on the 19th, the answers, once they're posted, will be attached there, because that's when the question was answered.
Yes, and that just happened this morning, so we'll
so now you're sweating that I'm going to get there and say,
I'm not sweating.
Here.
I'm actually not. I just want to make sure that it's there. Cindy checked it.
Okay. So.
And this is a continuation of the point I was going to make.
Read the response questions on the 2018. Okay, so they are there. So if you know when the question was asked, that's where the answers will be posted. If you were at a meeting and you asked a question, when the answers are posted, they'll show up where the agenda was that you attended. Okay.
So, Councillor Kira, I'm on the same wavelength as you because I think we've made tremendous strides in terms of access, but that's just not a very intuitive way for people to find out where the question is, where the answer is. So I'm confident that you can take this away and figure out what a better model would be. And I do know that in the past, for significant issues on the board's website, we've set up a separate, I'm going to call it button, a menu, where we've been able to click on whether it was for carding or I can't remember what the other headings were. So perhaps there's another way that we can facilitate it from the board's end so that we are the entry point for people who are interested in following the answers to questions that have been asked in the past and that are going to be asked going forward.
Excellent.
So we'll certainly take that away and make sure that it is user-friendly.
Okay. So I derailed you there. We got to the answers posted from the last, and you were going to tackle some of the questions that have been raised here so far?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the first one is body-worn camera, and
Yes.
the board will remember that there was a one-year pilot that was done a couple of years ago, and I think the pilot did conclude that a couple of things. The public likes body-worn. Our officers are pretty well like body-worn, and it's a significant investment, both on the capital and operating side. And at the time that we did it 2 years ago, cloud technology was not available in Canada, so we really couldn't consider it. We had to consider storage on-premise, as we call it. The world has changed, and now there's companies in Canada that actually provide cloud technology, so that should hopefully be a cheaper way to store images and the like. And so that looks like it will reduce the cost. But what we're doing right now, because it's a significant investment in what we told the board we were going to do, we have $500,000 in our capital budget in 17 that will basically allow us to do a non-binding RFP. So we're not necessarily going to go ahead unless it meets the board's interests and the public's interests. And that's intended to go through a non-binding RFP. So we bring expertise to the table from a legal perspective, because you can appreciate vendors want to make money on this. We want to make sure that they make a little bit of money, but it doesn't cost us a lot of money in the longer term. So none of this, it's cheap now, but then 10 years from now, as we grow, it becomes really expensive. We're bringing procurement expertise to the table in terms of a fairness commissioner, as well as actual procurement people that are actually going to be working on this, and any other expertise that we need to actually make sure that we do our due diligence, and that what we bring to the board is a well thought out and researched recommendation in terms of how we move forward. So Mr. Sewell is right. The only thing that's in our budget right now is $500,000 for those types of expenses. If we don't spend that in 17, and we won't spend all of it, certainly that will be available in 18. As far as the actual capital, we don't know how much that's going to cost yet. So, we could guess at it, but I don't think you want to make a decision based on a guesstimate. We need to come back to the board with more definitive cost numbers, including the opportunity cost that's associated with officers spending time classifying events that they've recorded, which then could potentially take them away from their day-to-day activities. So there's that. And as we talk, the technology is evolving. So transcription technology has evolved to the point where it's much more efficient. So there's a lot of things. So what the board will see at some point down the line is a recommendation of some sort in terms of how we move forward. At that point, we will then populate our capital program so that we actually have the money. If it's approved by the board, it's approved by the city, because there's competing priorities. That's basically the way. But there's not just one-time costs associated with this. There's ongoing investments that are going to have to be made as well. So that's really where we're at with that. So we're keeping the board apprised through the capital variance report. We're certainly going to keep the board apprised as we move forward, and where decisions need to be made, certainly the board will be involved.
So I want to ask a follow-up on the body worn, so I'll ask it now before we go on to a next one. So I hear you saying the $500,000, you're going to carry forward what wasn't spent, but so you're saying, well, we're at target in the multi-year there. You had the 5-year multi-year, and we're at debt target. There's nothing built in the 5-year plan for the big purchase?
No, in fact, it's below what the city calls below the line. So we have a couple of projects below the line. Connected officer, again, because we don't know what the long-term investment is going to be in that, both one-time and ongoing. We've got an idea, and body worn. So right now, the city is aware that we're looking at both those projects. At some point, we probably will be able to give them numbers, but even if we were to say make a decision in 18, we actually won't buy anything more than likely until 19, because there's a process that we would have to go through in terms of procurement, contracts, and the like. So you would probably see it in the 19 to 28.
But that's why I'm asking. In the 5-year plan, is there a number, a placeholder number? If you may be buying something in 19 or 20, why are we not factoring that into meeting the debt target?
Because we basically don't know what that number is with any degree of certainty now. So we've talked to the city about this, and
so where it says we're zero, we're at debt target. Are we below debt target so we could put in something, or do we have a real problem and the expectation of getting this done within 5 years is actually impossible to meet?
No, I think the target will still be the target, unless the city, we can talk them into and justify the need to increase the target. What we're going to have to do is work within that target in terms of other projects. And I talked about facilities and the shift from bricks and mortar to technology. We're going to have to work within that target. So right now, that's really the message, that there's a number of competing priorities that we have to do. And if we want to do body worn, if we had included it this year, we would be above target. But we didn't even know what to include. If you remember the last time, the number was $88 million over a 10-year period. So it's quite significant.
Okay.
Can I have a follow-up suggestion? Sure. So that was very helpful because I wondered where we were going to see that unpredictable but ultimately expected forecast. And you mentioned the last figure you mentioned was 88 million, which might go up, might go down. We hope it goes down based on technology. I think that that's exactly the kind of footnote that would be usefully included with the right parameters so people understand that we're not building it into this zero budget exercise for reasons that you've articulated, because the reality is, and you may have a better way of framing this, Councillor Carroll, given your much stronger budget experience, we are going to have to spend money that we're not forecasting right now by, if I understood Mr. Venetiano, trading off on existing projects that are forecast. So that's a policy decision that I think we want to pay close attention to.
So what we can do certainly is provide that level of information to the meeting on October 26th.
Yes.
So that at least it's on the record in terms of this whole below-the-line discussion. In the meantime, we are continuing to have discussions with the city and the budget chief around some of these below-the-line and above-the-line projects. So certainly that may also change how we proceed on some of this stuff. But certainly I think the board needs to be apprised, and certainly I agree with both of you that we need to put it on the radar at the very least.
I would appreciate if there was a slide that showed that both the connected officer and BWCs are currently below the line. I think the city budget committee needs to know that too. Iceberg dead ahead. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. A slide. Yes. Yes. Your first question. Okay. Drum roll.
Thank you. I appreciated the format, considering it was the first document I read for this board, and it was very clear. My question was along the same lines, is that I didn't see a breakdown by project or initiative area, and I would have liked to have seen that a little bit, especially considering kind of a few things that are coming up around, like next year with the cannabis legalization. You know, what are the extra pressures that will be on the force in preparation for that? And also would have liked to see a little bit about what have you allocated for training of officers in your, current complement with regards to your mental health training, implicit assumption training, all the stuff that you do. I would have liked to see a little bit of detail in that regard as well.
Sure. And so our budget in detail does provide certainly the training. We can get more information, but it is in our budget. We have the Toronto Police College that provides a lot of the training, and certainly Deputy McLean can speak to some of the initiatives there. So we've got internal training for mandatory training that we have to do, and then and that continues to expand as recommendation comes out of inquests and other forums, so that we ensure that our people deal with the various communities in the best way. So certainly we can provide that level of information.
And Ms. Mulliner also asked, the second half of the police accountability questions are about unpacking, and I think this follows on what Upala was saying, which is, unpacking some of these programs. What's going into this in terms of anti-racism work, which could be seen one of two ways, under training expenses, but it's also part of culture change, a la transformation task force. Is there an answer that fits within the way it's framed in the Police Accountability Coalition? Because you unpack that a little bit for us.
So I'm going to ask Deputy Chief McLean to come up and talk about some of the programs on the anti-racism.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I'm going to talk specifically what we're doing today, and I'm going to highlight what I'll call our crown jewel of police training, and that's our in-service training. And I'm sure most of you have heard a lot about that. That's a 3-day training that we deliver to our police officers. About 4,500 officers were trained last year. To date, just shy of 3,500. And this training builds on a lot of recommendations from Inquest, best practices, PACER review, those types of things. So I'm going to speak specifically about building on PACER's recommendation number 12, which spoke directly to training. So I'll start last year. We addressed quite a bit of implicit and explicit bias. We built training scenarios in and around that. Some of those training scenarios are debriefed by members of the community, and the feedback that I have of that is that it's both very positive, well received by uniformed members, as well as those members of the community who are assisting us with that training and that learning. In addition, we have we have dedicated some members of our service to the City of Toronto's action plan to interrupt and disrupt anti-Black racism in the sense of training. We have one of our sergeants dedicated to that, as well as to the communications and as well as race-based collection of data. So we have 3 members associated and assisting on that project. We're looking at next year building on the training that we are delivering, looking at, again, exposing our members to the diversity of our city, specifically in line with goal number 3, addressing the complex needs of a large city. So scenarios based in and around those types of interactions, particularly also continuing with the notion of the regulated interaction and training, and scenarios are in and around that. Procedural justice, ensuring that we are treating members with respect, articulating what we are doing, as well as being able to further train on our court testimony. So that next year's program builds on what we're doing this year, which built on what we addressed in 2016. I would be remiss if I did not mention that coming out of our modernization was an RFP that was issued for an academic partner. We are in the negotiation phase of that initiative, so it's still confidential. We're still in the confidential period. But one of the things that I have specifically asked for the negotiating team to work with the vendor that we are exploring is anti-Black, anti-oppression training, Indigenous training, and I'll say training and education, as well as assisting us with our evaluation techniques of our training, so that we can better understand and articulate and report and tell our story of how the training was received immediately and then at appropriate intervals afterwards. So while that is, I can speak at a high level, that is something that we are specifically working on. And while we have had those subjects as part of our training in the past, what we are looking for as a service is professionalizing our training and having those types of topics delivered by academic experts and those who are actually working and studying those types of fields. So I know that's a high overview. I think there was a question about cost. While it's not specific, speaking again to our in-service training program, last year training the 4,500 officers was in and around, this is a very high level ballpark, about $4.8 million. So that's a 3-day course. Specifically our third days is in and around anti-racism and implicit bias, so you divide that by a third, so in and around $1.6 million. So does that begin to tackle it?
While you're still here, can you also talk about the R2MR training and how many officers have been trained on that and what your budget for that is?
Thank you. I'm going to be honest, I don't have that with me at my hands, but I can certainly follow up and get that to you. Yeah, I can tell you that the way it's being rolled out is for senior officers and supervisory officers this year, with it being rolled out to our members, certainly starting next year. And I think we had, as supervisors and command officers, an 8-hour program, so 1 full day, and the first chunk to be rolled out next year will be a 4-hour program. But I will get those facts for you.
And so to add the piece, and this takes your question and ties it back to the question that the Police Accountability Coalition asks actually every year. Where does that sit on which line? What you just described, are those things that are resting in training in college? Are they resting in the HR office? Where does the funding for those sit in the lines we look at? Because I think that's why they keep asking, where's the breakdown? We break down what we do, but then we don't tie it back to where does the money sit? And we constantly deal with the same question every year.
Do you want to take that?
If you look, it's actually posted. If you go into the detail, the Toronto Police College is listed as one of the units, and it's a $16 million investment that we make in terms of providing mandatory training. But I think the question really is, and this is what we're moving towards, and this is just an example, right? One of our objectives, and this year being a transitional year makes it a little bit more difficult, is to move to program-based budgeting. So to your question, Ms. Chandra-Sikara, we would be able to say, this is the program, this is how much it costs, this is what they do, and if we want to expand or shrink the program, this is where we might be able to do it. That's where we want to move to. Right now, we could tell you that we spend $16 million at the college, but to your point, Madam Chair, I think there's monies that are being spent in other areas of the service as well to achieve that objective, whether it's cultural change and other areas of the service.
Yes, Marie.
This is a wish list, so this is my 10-year wish. I won't be on this board at that point. You may not be here, but how wonderful would it be if the process that you have begun to build around transparency, around the budgeting and the program, also included the full loop where community analysis and review of the training, for example, was factored into the process and budgeted for visibly, so that we could actually see as representatives of the community how the for example, the senior officer 8-day training played out, how were the competencies assessed over time, over years, how did the community provide input to and perhaps participate in that, and how was that factored in from a budgeting perspective?
That's exactly where we want to go, is developing those programs and then having indicators that actually measure the success of those programs in terms of achieving what the program was set up to do. And then it's prioritizing, right? We know that we're not going to get a lot more money, if any more money. So then it's a matter of where do we shift our priorities, and that could shift from year to year depending on some of the issues in the environment as it changes. That's where we want to go. The problem is that we're so busy doing budgets every year, we almost need to step back and actually be able to sit down and think of what some of these programs are, bring it to our oversight body and say, these are the programs that we see as being important, because we could have somebody else saying, well, I'm really interested in priority response and how much money you spend on that, right? Which I think is one of John Sewell's questions. So that's where we want to go, and we're hoping that we're able to get there in the next couple of years is really the goal. So.
Okay.
But I think it's a very valid point.
Okay. Are there more questions? Okay, then. I'm sorry. We're into committee questions, and I'm next. You might like my questions. We're into member questions now, so we don't want to lose the momentum. Okay, so my connected officer question actually is answered. It's early in the presentation. So connected officer, you're still working on the 500,000. We don't have a number plugged in there. Does TTF task force know that it's really below the line?
Yes, and the 500,000, I think you mean the body-worn camera?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Connected officer, we did some of the funds that we approved to be used at the discretion of achieving the way forward. Do any of those include doing any REOIs or anything like that around the connected officer piece, or you're not at the tech?
So what we also
readiness
have,
level
if you remember
yet?
last year, or this year, in June, well, it started sooner, but we got approval from the province in May or June around the policing effective modernization grants, which is about $18 million that we got. Part of that
Right.
was an application to help fund a proof of concept for the Connected Officer Program.
Proof of concept, yes,
so-
that was
so-
what I was looking for, okay.
So that is really rolling out 700 cameras across the service and basically seeing how it works. I think the challenge is you will hear about different police services and organizations saying that they're connected. The question always has to be connected to what? And so we want to make sure that if we do it, we want to do it right, and that there's actual value in terms of officers having a device that they can not only do CPIC checks, but perhaps do other business on those as well. That's where we want to move to. Right now, basically, we're in the proof of concept stage. At some point, we'll build a business case. Well, the business case has been developed, a business case for moving forward, and then come back to the board in terms of a capital request.
Okay, Deputy Chief Coxon, did you want to follow up on that?
No, other than to just point out that we knew that there were going to be significant IT costs. And
Yeah.
we said that it should be considered as part of the balancing of the capital budget as we return buildings, bricks and mortar to the city. That we have to factor in that some of that may need to come back to the service to enhance our technology.
Okay, so those savings would be plowed over into that, okay. Slide 7. Slide 7 was, to me, a sort of a great sneak peek into some of the things that are the future of TTF implementation. But this brings me to this is under the heading of, I think we can continue with the budget process. We can get to where we're ratifying the budget at the board level here and sending it on to the city. But at some point, and I don't think it has to wait all the way until next year's budget process, would it be possible, I know it's cross-divisional, but would it be possible to have a sort of a multi-year, mind you, mini budget within a budget? This is the TTF budget. These are the things that are expenditures and things needed within TTF to make it happen. Because I think it has to, if we're moving to making our budget more transparent by going in a programmatic way instead of line by line, that is a program in a lot of people's minds.
I think you said use the word integrated, and if you didn't, I'm
That's
going to
my favorite word.
Certainly, I think we're going to try to do that as much as we can, but we're trying to also find different ways of funding some of these initiatives, whether they're through the PEM grant, whether through the modernization reserve, whether it's through our capital program, whether it's through our operating program. I think what you're saying is, what we can do though is identify those initiatives and then identify the funding source and give you a total in terms of the level of investments that we're going to require to actually move forward on some of those. And in fact, in order to get to zero, and I should have mentioned it as part of the presentation, we actually reduced a lot of those initiatives and eliminated from our operating request, recognizing that we could use modernization reserve money and hopefully the grant money from the province to help fund some of those initiatives at least one time, and then build it into our budgets later on. So that's basically our strategy, because we simply can't get to zero and fund some of those investments out of operating. We were able to do it with the HR or reorg, but beyond that is going to be really difficult.
I'm not talking about just the cap side or the op side. I'm talking about the whole thing within TTF. Here's my reason for wanting to do this. I've begun to fear something because the tech buys are big, but we the accountability coalitions and other organizations come forward, and I worry that what will happen over time is it's easy to find out the price tag of the big tech buys, and really hard to nail the jello to the wall. How much does it cost to change culture? Some of the human resources pieces. And I worry that if we don't have a huge pot of funding for TTF, the tech buys will all get made up front and culture kind of moves below the line. And we don't get, as a board, to actually give our input into, are we moving on all fronts? If we don't have all the money we need to do everything, can we have some input into how we prioritize what we are going to do over the next 5 years? And if we don't create a little mini transformational way forward mini budget within our big budget to demonstrate these are the things we want to do. These are the costs as we know them, and sharpen those up as we know more. It will be hard for the board to help prioritize. Which ones do you do if you don't have all the funds right now?
I agree, and that's exactly what we're going to provide you. You need to have that in terms of the process there will go through the chief and command first, and then come here to the board in terms of recommendations in terms of where we think the priority should be, and then the board obviously has the opportunity to question and make recommendations to shift. But you're right, there's limited money, and we're using a number of different funding sources, and I think the board should be in tune with where some of those investments are going to be required, both next year and probably for the next 5 years.
And helping to prioritize if we don't come up with the funds for you. Yeah. Okay, so that's slide 7. Slide 15, I'm wondering if we can go there because it speaks to the training, and I think for our new board member, this is a jargony page. This is a very jargony page. So what do we mean when we say class direct hires?
Okay, so the way it works in Ontario is there's 3 recruit. Oh, sorry.
The way it works in Ontario is there's 3 recruit classes at Aylmer, where recruits would go for training, and then we do more training actually in Toronto ourselves. So we have a lot more training than some of the other jurisdictions. The direct hires are what we call either direct or laterals from other police services who want to move from Halton, Peel, OPP to our service. And so normally we have about 5 to 10 of those a year. The advantage of those obviously is that you get an experienced officer. And certainly there's a process that we go through, and we're enhancing that process to ensure that those lateral hires actually meet the competencies that we require in our organization, regardless of whether you're experienced or not. We want the type of people that are going to help us move forward. The classes, as you can see in yellow, are basically when those recruits would graduate. And so the December class that we have in 17 will graduate in May. And so we'll have 20 officers on the street, and under the new format, we'll be in neighborhoods. And then we have a class in April that will graduate in September, and then one in August that will graduate in December or January of 19. So that's the way the classes work. There's, like I said, training that they have to meet and pass at Aylmer, and then there's additional training that's provided here. And if you want more details, I'm sure.
So new folks are going through an Aylmer and becoming police officers. Our college in Etobicoke is also training existing officers and need continual retraining.
Yes.
And that's why the training budget looks gigantic when you say you have a supposed hiring freeze. There's ongoing perpetual.
Well, it's big, but it's so critical to ensuring that our people have the skills and the training to be able to deal with different kinds of situations and with different kinds of people, whether they have mental health issues or other issues. And that's why our training, and to achieve other objectives around anti-racism and implicit biases, all of that comes into that training, along with the mandatory annual training that they have to do in order to be a police officer on the street. So they don't pass those mandatory trainings, they don't get to go on the street, is the way we work.
Slide 19, the vehicle reserve, we made that agreement a few years ago, we were a little behind, and we sat down with the city and agreed to keep pace with it. Are we on track?
Is it 19?
Sorry, did I?
Sorry, 20.
Maybe my notes are wrong. Yeah, a couple times I was junking, because I think the slide behind that one broke it down. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know when we sat down and updated the program, we were behind. So where are we now?
We've been, and Councillor, you were the budget chief at the city at the time. We've been trying to make those investments and those contributions and increase them. And every year there was a target that had to be reached, so we kept deferring them. We were able to make them in some years, and in other years we've actually been able to move surplus that we've achieved. And the CFO at the city was very kind in allowing us to do at least a one-time injection. This year, I think if we can continue with the budget as it's been recommended, we're making a pretty good investment that will certainly help us increase our base. And basically what it does is in the next 2 to 3 years, you will see that incremental pressure, all things being equal, go to zero. And then that will allow us to then either create savings out of the budget, or more importantly, to pay for some of those investments that we're going to have to be made to put some of the initiatives, transformational and otherwise, forward. So we're good in terms of, this is now reflects exactly where we want to go with our contributions.
So that's why I ask if, because you got an unallocated in here of about a reduction of unallocated of about 7 million. So if we got to the third quarter and you hadn't met that yet, you wouldn't go back to this line. You want to keep this on track.
We're going to do everything possible to ensure that this, because I think sooner or later...
That was neither a yes nor a no.
No, the answer is no.
Okay.
We are, though, hoping, because we are going to be applying for provincial grants, and so that's the uncertainty that we can't come here. If we get those provincial grants, that pressure will be taken care of.
Okay.
And the other thing I want to press is the budget continues. The process, as more new information and new contracts are entered into, we're going to be going up, down. The end result is the envelope is still going to be a 0% increase at the end of this.
Okay. And for 2018, we're still in this contract. So the only thing built in with respect to the collective bargaining agreement, am I still on, is the expense of the collective bargaining. You've got a factor in there. I think in the board budget we have a factor for possible.
Yeah, we've
human
actually provided, recognizing that that negotiations will start very soon and probably in 18. There's monies that we set aside. So that budget actually you'll see go up and down depending on where we're at in the bargaining process.
But the last day of the agreement is the last day of the year, so we don't have to have the city holding in reserve until 19.
No, in fact, we've allocated monies knowing that we're going to start the negotiations before the agreements expire. So
no, what I mean for whatever is the increase itself.
Oh,
that we don't have to build until 19.
That will be that's in the outlook. The city knows it's coming.
Right.
And then they have the similar pressure because theirs expire at the end of 19. But the bottom line is, yes, they will be well in tune in terms of the monies that they need to put away potentially to help pay for that.
Right, and that's why I asked that question. One of the deputies, Miguel, was asking about that. With respect to how much we need to put away, there's a discussion between the arbitration community, looking at the CPI, et cetera, and then basically the city manager and CFO tell you we need to hold this much in reserve out of your budget. For
the outlooks assume, so we basically, as Miguel pointed out, we've got 17 million in our 18 budget request, and that basically represents the effective rate that was negotiated by the board, which was below 2%.
Yeah.
For future years, we've assumed inflation 2%. That's just.
But that's in agreement with the city.
Yeah, and that's just an assumption that we've made that will be confirmed.
Okay. On slide 30, I'm moving into capital here. On slide 30, there is, once you get past the 5-year program, there is a big jump in 23-24. So just beyond the 5-year program, we have some known quantities there. There's a big jump in terms of meeting the debt target. Is that just because the debt target hasn't been hardly defined yet?
Yeah, it's that, and the fact that the reality is as much as you try to do a 10-year program, a lot of our projects, it's not like TTC that's building a subway that's going to go maybe 7 years. A lot of our projects are a little shorter term, 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
So there's a lack there's more certainty in the first 5 years than in the second 5 years of the program, and I think that jump reflects that uncertainty. So we're being a bit conservative in terms of what we might need down the line, without, because we just don't know what's coming at this point. We're trying to move so that...
Oh, so those are estimates? That's not something big that you know is completing in 2024?
Yeah, well, I can tell you the reserve part of it is pretty firm. The debt part of it, and so the projects like the facilities realignment, those are the ones that we have to provide. We get a little bit more rigor and more information on in terms of what it's actually going to cost.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And lastly, I think it's on slide 32. I started to run out. Yes, on slide 32 for the amalgamation of Division 54, 55, which is consultations chugging along there. That amount is in the 2018 plan. What would we be spending 2.8 million on this year? Is that a real estate purchase or?
So I think there was actually about $6 million in 17 that we're hopefully going to be able to carry forward to 18, which was supposed to be basically the ability to actually buy the site. Now this is a city-owned site, so we're actually asking for some guidance from the city in terms of how they're going to treat that from the capital program. We're not
Right.
paying anything, we're just paying the value. All 3 sites that are being considered are all city-owned, which is a good thing. So the 2.8 million is really then, assuming that we get a site at some point during later this year or the first quarter of 2018, then we start our process in terms of hiring a prime consultant, an architect to actually design. We go through the process of site approvals that we're going to require, and then at some point, probably towards the end of 18 and more than likely into 19, we hire a contractor that would actually build it. So the 2.8 is really upfront money that we have to spend, none of it probably having anything to do with construction, but just consultants that you're going to need to actually design and build this thing.
But the feasibility of doing it, any money needing to be spent on consultants just to decide, is it feasible to put them together? We're past that?
We're past that.
Okay.
The business case was made. We're actually consolidating and getting, basically going from 2 to 1, which then allows the city to get 2 facilities back. Right. And it's part of our territorial optimization, which then ensures that the services that the community is getting in those areas is unchanged.
Right, right. Okay. Those are my questions. I'm just looking at board budget. Nope, those are my questions. Seeing no more questions. Did you have any more questions, Upala? Anything about our own board budget? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yes.
For my benefit, not
Small
just for the new members' benefit. So remind me what happens next. Thank you.
So our next meeting is the 26th. Our next meeting is the 26th, which is in fact presenting it to the board. The public will be allowed to make deputations, as they always are, when we're doing the final pass at the budget. Everyone's available, of course, in between now and then for questions of staff are always welcome, whether of the service or of administrative staff, in between now and then. This budget, as it is today, will be presented to the board, and hopefully the board will adopt it then, because we're always chasing the city's deadline. We're always a little bit behind it. It will go to the city. We don't know what the city will do when they edit, but we'll be at that point in the city's budget process that it will then be presented there publicly, and the community that does not particularly pay attention to the police board will have input into it as well in their public process. So there'll be that new wider screen of people looking at it, and the city's budget process doesn't adopt until March, and so there may be some, pardon? February, that's right. There may be some back and forth in between then. As I alluded to, and we had explained in more detail in our meeting on the 5th, there is an allocated reduction in there. There may be continued work. If you can name and allocate some of that stuff in between now and then in conversation with the city, we will. But unless we're proposing changes on the 26th, the flatline budget that's here today will be what gets presented to the board. Mm-hmm.
So my understanding from a process that will be the board budget committee recommended budget to the full board.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's right. So we are making a decision today, because today we actually have to adopt that's what is presented to them. So it's a good thing we asked for declarations of conflict, because you are actually going to vote on something. Yes. Oh, are you not sworn yet?
I am, but not public.
Oh, okay. Okay.
It's the issue that the budget committee is a 2-person committee.
Yes, you're not formally a member of the budget committee. Yes. Okay. And what a great guest you are. Okay. So do you have a written resolution to put on the board, or can I simply do one orally? Okay. So taken as a package, I don't have any changes to make to the budget, having reviewed it. So my motion is going to be that the budget committee recommend the 2018 operating and capital budget of the Toronto Police Services and the proposed budget for the Toronto Police Services Board to the Toronto Police Services full board for adoption.
Did you say parking first?
No, I always forget parking. Well, it's all illegal anyway, but so that was a joke, Derek. No. Do you need parking enforcement to be built into the language of the motion? Okay. So Toronto Police Services, yes. Toronto Police Services operating in capital, Toronto Police Services Board operating in capital, and the budget of the parking enforcement unit. Just to make it formal, moved by Councillor Carroll, Board Member Carroll, and seconded by Ms. Molliner. All in favor? Adopted. Thank you. Let the minutes show that that was unanimous.